Back a year ago.
This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tour, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. Today, we're joined by Casey Helwig and Matt Winans from Imperial Yeast. Imperial Yeast was founded in 2014 with the desire to provide brewers of all scales with world-class yeast and the best possible customer and technical support. Nicely spread out across the U.S., one can find Imperial Yeast in both Portland, Oregon, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A little bit more about our two guests. Casey Helwig studied philosophy in school, which led to many late night discussions with friends trying to solve the world's problems. Inevitably, there would be beer involved at these gatherings, and it didn't take long for her to fall in love with everything the craft beer industry had to offer. She has held positions from serving, bartending to brewery sales, and for the past 6 years, has filled the role of sales manager at Imperial Yeast. Dr. Matt Winans earned his PhD in yeast systems biology from West Virginia University under Dr. Jennifer Gallagher. As an early career scientist, Winans was awarded several National Science Foundation fellowships, including the East Asia and Pacific Summer Institute Fellowship, under which Dr. Hiroshi Kitagaki, the Japanese Society for the Promotion of Science, facilitated yeast breeding research for sake brewing. His most recent publication is a mini review titled Yeast Hybrids in Brewing that is available for free online. Currently, Matt leads the research, development, and innovation team for Imperial Yeast in Portland. So, wow, without further ado, we welcome Casey and Matt to the Beer Bound Podcast. Hello to you both.
Hi, happy to be here.
Hey, Andy. Happy to be here. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, of course. Very impressive indeed. Well, maybe we can start things off. Casey, Matt, maybe we could start with Casey. Maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and your connection to Imperial Yeast.
So like you mentioned, I've been here the past 6 years. Role has definitely coalesced to sales manager. When I first started, we were in like full-on startup mode. I think I was like the third or the fourth employee hired behind ownership. So I wore lots of hats in those early days when we were kind of getting our feet underneath us and trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So did a lot of like customer side facing stuff. Obviously sales, customer service, marketing, accounting, shipping. So wore lots and lots of hats, but over the years, the people much better than myself have taken over those positions. And now I just head up sales and customer service. Outside of work, I still love beer. I'll often be kind of touring breweries wherever I'm traveling or just visiting on the weekends here in Portland. I love to be outside, hiking, camping, biking, kind of you name it. Outdoors is where I would like to be spending most of my time, even in the rainy Pacific Northwest. Yeah, that's about it on who I am. In terms of how I got started here, it kind of fell into my lap. Not to say I didn't work hard to get to where I am, but one of the owners, I knew him fairly well, and he knew that I was not super stoked on my current position, and called me up one day and was like, "Hey, do you want to come work for me at Imperial?" It's like, okay. And he sold it to me. He's like, "You'll be sales manager, blah, blah, blah. Like, it'll be a great position, a great job." And then I got here and I was like, oh, sales manager means I get to do all of these other jobs also. I better learn how to like be an accountant and like learn about international shipping of organic product. So that was a fun crash course. But it's been such an enjoyable experience to be a part of Imperial from its infancy to where we are now. I think it kind of blew everybody away in terms of our expectations of growth and where we expected to be versus where we are currently. We've got 2 locations here in Portland, Oregon as headquarters, and then we opened up our Philadelphia location in December of 2020. So it's been a little over a year out there that we've been producing yeast, and that's going super. The feedback from the just local Philadelphia beer scene has been incredible. So much support and kindness shown by those folks, and then the customer response just across the entire Eastern Seaboard has been wonderful. Just being able to cut down shipping costs from hundreds of dollars to maybe $100 has been a huge one for us. Well, yeah, that's me.
Very cool. And maybe Matt, can you tell us your journey from being interested in yeast systems and in biology up until now with the enterprise of Imperial Yeast?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I guess my story probably starts probably in undergrad. I first learned that people could make beer when I was taking Bio 101. I had a professor, Dr. Pam Huggins, who told me that during a lecture, she actually blew up a bunch of bottles. And I was just like, if she can do it, I think I can do it. Not blow up bottles, but to make beer. And so I kind of learned a little bit about home brewing, and that was probably in 2010, I think so, probably about 2010, 2009. And yeah, then I got up at the higher levels, and one of the model organisms very popular in labs is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is the brewer's yeast. And I remember going to a different professor and saying, "Hey, is this the same kind of yeast that I am homebrewing with?" And they're like, "Yeah, but you have to go to a bigger university to actually experience it and to study it." So I ended up going after a while to West Virginia University, where I got my PhD in yeast systems biology. And I remember leaving undergrad because I worked for a little bit outside of the industry. And I always thought that home brewing would just kind of be a hobby. I was always going to do it. And I just kept coming back to it all the time. I'm sure you guys can relate, everyone here. Once you kind of get bit by that bug, it doesn't quit. So I ended up getting, like I said, into West Virginia University and studying yeast. And I went to a conference called the American Society of Brewing Chemists. It was the Brewing Summit in 2016, I believe. And yeah, I went to that and met a bunch of people. I said, this industry is great. The people are very interested in, learning about the science of beer and fermentation and yeast. It felt like the right thing to do for my life. And so anyways, I ended up learning more. I ended up getting a grant to go and work at Hiroshi Kitagaki's lab in Japan, where I work with some of the sake breweries out there making yeast hybrids of Saccharomyces arbicola. And that led to some exciting paths and like really talking with some very interesting and really, great people. So, and then I actually sought out Imperial. I think I might have talked to Casey on the phone a long, long time ago. And during a visit out to Portland, I ended up tracking down Jess and Jason and Owen, and I think I talked with Casey as well a little bit. But I just kind of came out here and I said, "Here's what I do. Let's join forces." I had a brewery and distillery consultancy at the time, and I've been here since I think maybe May in 2020, and I've been loving it ever since. So that's how I got here, and I do the research and development and some of the educational outreaches, and it's going great.
That's great. Well, I think we've spoken to a few individuals who work for different yeast labs, both in the US and in Canada. I'm trying to grasp just sort of how big this is becoming. These smaller enterprises looking to experiment in yeast and looking to assist in this growing industry of craft beer, as well as other alcoholic beverages as well. How unusual is Imperial Yeast? Not unusual, but are you seeing a lot more competition in the industry? Is this really sort of becoming a craft scene that is blossoming, or do you see yourselves as still a craft entity that is, again, I'm searching for another word, but unusual, I suppose, in terms of what exists in the market?
I think niche maybe might be the word.
That's what I want. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely a niche industry. We're pretty science based. We don't have quite as much competition as like a brewery does, but there are some other specialized labs out there. But I think Casey will agree with me on this, that what separates us is we really, really like the customer service and trying to outreach a lot of the knowledge and share that stuff. So Casey, you have anything else on that one?
There are a handful of yeast labs in the United States and around the world, really. But if we're kind of primarily looking towards the United States, White Labs and Yeast kind of come to mind as these two yeast labs that are sort of the grandparents of the yeast world and the craft beer industry. But there are so many other options available to brewers these days across the country. And to echo what Matt says, to what makes us different, quality of product obviously is super important. Making sure that brewers get what they asked for when they asked for it, so that they can rely on like healthy, quick fermentations, which just helps them schedule out beer, brew schedules, and turn beer quickly, and rely on consistency batch to batch. There's also that transparency piece. It's like we really like education here, where we've got a program that's designed to just basically be like a crash course in yeast management for brewers. It's offered locally here in Portland and soon locally out in Philadelphia, where breweries can attend for a day, learn how to harvest yeast, learn how to cell count, learn how to run viability, learn how to dial in repitches, and just handle yeast for the best possible outcome, so they get more bang for their buck. Breweries, they can get 5, 10, 15 generations out of a pitch of yeast. It drastically reduces their yeast costs. And then that service piece, being head of sales and customer service, I'm not going to say that we're the best, but I think we are. Just making things easy, and being quick and responsive, and just kind of being normal, real, everyday human beings when folks call in or email in, has really kind of driven the success that we've seen over the past few years.
So I guess this is more of a question for you, Casey. How much work do you have to do to sort of rattle the cages of craft breweries to say, okay, there's massive yeast providers out there, but we're a more niche entity. We can serve you in a better way in terms of customer service, but also in perhaps something specific that you're looking for, you can adapt a little bit more potentially. Do you have a challenge in your day to day to sort of serve as an outreach to breweries to say, we exist, this is what we do? Or are you in a market that you found yourself that there's not a lot of competition in terms of yeast labs of your size and of your capabilities?
Yeah, kind of yes and no. I'd say that we have no small goals here. We definitely want to, become hopefully one day the biggest, yeast lab providing, brewers yeast to craft beer in the world. That would be that is definitely top of the goals list. But we put a fair amount of effort and work into our sales and marketing, just getting in front of people, being in the market. Obviously the last 2 years has been really difficult on that front, but being in front of brewers, answering questions in person has been huge. Being able to attend conferences and events. On the marketing side, obviously we're marketing on all of the channels that you would expect, but also this industry is really focused on word of mouth and that kind of respect that you earn from breweries. And so a lot of the growth that we've experienced has been kind of organic, and brewer A tells brewer B that they've had a really great experience with Imperial. They really like the product. They like what it does for the beer. They're easy to work with. They've got super short lead times. And then we get a call from brewer B, and it just kind of snowballs from there. So we do absolutely put lots and lots of effort and time and kind of strategy into how we market ourselves and how we position our sales team. But this industry is so much based on word of mouth and your reputation within it. So we do a lot to every day ensure that industry or that reputation is deserved and earned.
Matt, maybe can you touch a little bit on the product itself? How many strains of yeast can you produce? Is there anything that, just tell us a little bit more about the actual inside of the lab, the secrets, as much as you can divulge.
Sure. Well, really, we keep a pretty open book when it comes to that stuff. Happy to talk with anyone about anything yeast related. But as far as the yeast strains that we work with, we have quite a few. And in case you will know the exact number about how many we have in our core strain, how many is that now? Is it 12, Casey?
Yeah, we have 10 guaranteed in stock strains and about 35 core strains that we produce regularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then our bank too, we have like a big bank and a negative 80 degrees Celsius freezer, and we have over 200 strains in there that we can access at any time. But we try to really provide the tried and true strains for the most part. And the lab inside it's pretty cool. I've been very fortunate that I joined the company when I did. I think probably one of every grad student's dream that works in a lab is to design their own lab one day. And I was able to do that, and we quickly outgrew that one. So we're getting to play kind of like Legos every day and build more parts on. So that's been really cool.
I'm curious about that bank you mentioned. So you said it's like tried and true strains. Are these just sort of special one-offs? Or are these ones that maybe have been, I don't know, especially requested by brewers? Anything like that?
Yeah, we start with probably the most popular strains that are tried and true. And those come from requests. They come from personal experience, brewing or home brewing. And there's a couple of different ways to keep yeast. The most simple, I guess, way to conceptualize it would be just in a liquid slurry. You can keep it like that for probably somewhere between 4 and 6 months, depending on what media is in there. And then you can store them on agar petri dishes, and that's probably about a month, 2 months. And then you can keep them on agar slants inside of a vial, and they're layered with mineral oil. and that prevents the oxygen from getting in there and causing some damage. Because the two things you really don't want when you're storing yeast is you don't want oxygen infiltration and you don't want high heat. So if you can try to remove those things as much as possible, your yeast is going to be better for storage. So after that, and that keeps like about 6 months or so. And after that, the best thing is really is -80. Some people will store them in liquid nitrogen. Some bacteria are lyophilized or dried, but that's how we store them. We keep -80. It's the best for not having cells mutate during storage as well.
I see. And does anyone like, I guess, how far does the experimentation go? Would a brewer maybe come to you and say, hey, like I tried this one, that's your tried and true, but I kind of want it to be like this. Is there anything you can do? Like, is there any sort of, I don't know, adaptation based on maybe a brewer's preference?
Yeah, there are. It's a little limiting because it is a lot of work to do that type of stuff and a lot of trial and error. So experimentation is the right word. And but there's really no limits to the brewer's creativity today.
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, we can come up with experiments all the time. I mean, I was with Casey the other day, and I think it was the Oregon Brewers Guild. We were at that conference, and we had some guys come up to us that are, I think Casey's worked with them quite a bit, but they wanted to capture some wild yeast from Hawaii. And a lot of times you'll have someone that wants to capture some wild yeast from their local environment and brew with it, and it is possible. But some of the issues that you run into is having so the brewer's yeast, it's kind of domesticated in a way, kind of like we do like animals would. And the domestication events that happen with brewer's yeast is it's able to flocculate out, it's able to ferment well. And it also doesn't have the phenolic off flavor for the most part. There are some styles where that's appropriate, but those are kind of like the markers of domestication in brewer's yeast. So if you isolate some, chances are they're probably going to be POF positive. But I've definitely fermented with wild yeast myself, and it's really fun. So yeah, creativity is out there, and we love hearing about it.
Yeah, there's no shortage of that in craft beer.
No.
Especially this day and age. Everything under the sun.
We have quite a few wild strains banked for folks. It's one of our offerings is just that private strain banking. And I know off the top of my head, I can think of several breweries that have captured wild yeast either on brewery property or in the surrounding local area and banked it with us. And then another kind of interesting way we get strains to put in the bank that I've kind of found really fascinating is when people are traveling and they're, at this little brewery in Belgium or in Germany, they'll be talking to a brewer and be able to obtain a sample of their house strain and bring it back and bank it with us. So that's really neat, just kind of seeing yeast travel all over the world via brewery folks.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know. Part of me is like, would a Belgian brewer just like give away some of their yeast? I don't know. Maybe it sounds a little off to me, but
sometimes they will.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they used to be shared quite a bit, like back in the old days. And I think, I'm trying to remember what brewery it was. But yeah, they had the first pure culture, and they would easily like disseminate that out to other breweries. So traditionally there are some people who are very secretive about their brewing practices and strains, but I've found at least people have been very receptive to sharing, and everyone wants you to isolate their unique yeast. I mean, I think Eben even came to he's a guy in our marketing department here. He came to me and he's got dreadlocks on, and he's like, I want to donate a dread to science. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, here, and like plucks it off and gives it to me. He's like, can we isolate some yeast from that? And I was like, yeah, put it in this container, please, right now. But we did get some yeast off of it. So Yeah, I love that aspect of it, and I even did some Appalachian Trail hiking back a few years ago, and isolated a bunch of different strains from the Appalachian Trail too. I want to do a PCT, so if anyone's hiking the PCT, call me up. We can work something out.
Is there any regulation to this, like in terms of the yeast you use? Like, are you allowed, like in terms of a domesticated yeast or a more wild strain, like in terms of yeast that you use? Is there any regulation to this, or
As
not at
far
all?
as what you could brew with, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are some. I mean, in general, most people are going to be using Saccharomyces cerevisiae to brew with. There are people that use other strains, especially for NA beers. There's or non-alcoholic beers. There's been quite a recent interest in using alternative strains. But personally, what I would recommend anyone doing this on their own or working with another company is to get it sequenced. And if it's a bacteria, you're going to use the I think 16S ribosomal region. It's a area that gets sequenced quite a bit for IDing, and for yeast, you're going to use the ITS region or the D1, D2 region. And basically what you do is you're going to sequence it, and then they have NCBI, and it's a national bank from the United States that houses sequences. And you basically take your DNA sequence that you got and you put it into this bank, and it's going to come back with a couple of matches. And you're going to want to make sure it's probably Saccharomyces cerevisiae before I would start drinking anything too crazy.
So maybe
Yeah.
on that point, it's like sequencing, I've heard it a couple of times before, but maybe you can give us like a sort of layman's terms of what that exactly is.
Sequencing? Yeah, absolutely. So us and many other organisms in the world, actually, I think almost all of them are made of DNA and deoxyribonucleic acid. And you have 4 base pairs. You have A, T, C, and G. And basically, most sequencing will take some kind of detector method, and they will run your organism, your sample, whatever you have, and it's usually purified DNA that you put through there. And then it will tell you what your sequence is, and you'll have a list of A, T, C, and Gs in different orders. And that's what you use to do the base matching on the NCBI blast. And yeah, I mean, we're really similar to yeast as far as like cell composition goes. And there's I think there's about, I have to go back, I didn't write this one down, but I think there's about let's say like 2 or 5% difference in the structure between different Saccharomyces cerevisiae strains. So there's quite a bit of difference between the different strains. And we know that as a yeast company, just looking at the way that things propagate, they grow, how their flocculation abilities are, their metabolism, fermentation, kinetics, and they're quite different. And so the basic dogma, if I could summarize it again, would be that you're going to have sequences of DNA, and they get translated into proteins, which end up making a difference in form and function and your phenotypes. So, and that would just be like physical or other attributes. Does that make sense, Garrett?
I got a little better understanding of it.
I see your
probably
Yeah,
face,
everyone's
Garrett.
got
go back
sequences
to-
made of A, T,
You're
C,
still
and G.
confused, Garrett, I think.
A little bit, but like everyone, it's almost like you're sort of identifying it for future data analysis is what it sounds like. Maybe if that's maybe I had a terrible interpretation of that. But
Every strain, every organism has a DNA sequence. And so
Okay.
what we use it for here, at least for IDing, is that one region where we can match it with a bank of different sequences that have already been ID'd.
Well, maybe pivoting a little bit to the business side of things, I guess maybe more for Casey. We spoke with a gentleman who works for a yeast lab close to where we are, close to Toronto. And he said a big issue, that a big difficulty that was associated with the company was logistics, just working with different craft breweries. Canada is a massive country, dealing with breweries all over the country, United States, pretty similar in size, but you have more people, so that maybe helps a little bit with logistics. Maybe can you tell us about, you have now 2 locations, which I assume you sort of touched on, that was probably for that reason. You're now located on the East Coast and the West Coast. How big of a challenge is logistics in what you do?
Yeah, logistics is definitely a challenge. So we ship yeast primarily within the United States, but send plenty up to Canada, and then outside the US to Europe, UK, the UK, Japan, China, Australia, New Zealand, kind of all over the place. And when you think about shipping a live liquid yeast product that has a very short shelf life and requires kind of perfect optimal temperatures, it makes things even more challenging. So we work with FedEx primarily, and utilize their priority service, so priority shipping service, which is expensive, but it's kind of the best way that we've found to ensure the yeast leaves our door and gets to the brewery's door the next day. Really, because you only have a couple of days to ship yeast before the ice packs melt and the temperature of the cooler goes way up, and now you're looking at loss of viability, bloating of the container, and then on the brewer side of thing, that's just going to lead to poor fermentation outcomes, off flavors in their finished beer, bad flocculation, poor harvesting, and just kind of cascade down from there. So logistics is definitely a challenge. We only really have the 2 options, FedEx and UPS. So we got into bed with FedEx really early on, and I think that's just kind of how we got to stay. But the bigger challenge is international shipping, because we're organic. That adds on a whole nother layer of challenges and bureaucracy and red tape, dependent on the country we're shipping into. So not only are you trying to ship a live liquid product that needs to stay somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees really quickly, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000 miles away, you're also dealing with the customs of whatever that country is, the customs department of whether that country is, and how they regulate organic products. So that is the biggest challenge by far, is the organics certification.
Okay, so do you know approximately how many breweries you work with all over the world?
Oh man, approximately, I don't. I'd say we probably have about 3,000 to 4,000 breweries or customers in our system at the moment. I have not looked in a long time. I guess I probably should know that off the top of my head. But
It's just so big that you can't keep track.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
And I would say that, not all of those folks are ordering from us on a regular basis. But I mean, gosh, there's 9,000 breweries in the US alone. So there's lots and lots of opportunity and room for growth. That's for sure.
Do you work with other beverage companies, other alcoholic beverage companies, other companies that would require yeast, or most of your clientele are breweries?
I mean, most of our clientele are breweries, or retail shops that are selling to the homebrew market. But we also work with cideries, wineries, distilleries, folks that are making hard kombucha. So kind of anything fermentation related that your end result is alcohol production.
Now you mentioned organic. So is every yeast strain produced by Imperial, it's all organic, so every single one?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, good stuff. So, and from what I saw, it sounds like you cater to home brewers as well as maybe commercial breweries. Is there, I don't know, I guess a large push for, or large demand for organic yeast? Maybe let's say opposed to non-organic. Are you seeing more of a push for that?
It's definitely becoming something that's more top of mind for folks. I wouldn't say it's a priority, especially here in the United States. But it definitely is something that sets us apart from other yeast labs. It allows those breweries that are certified organic to kind of close that loop of organic ingredients. Folks could get organic malts and organic hops for a really long time, and being able to source organic yeast was, at least organic liquid yeast, was not a possibility until we came on the scene. But organic, a lot of folks kind of wonder what that means. Think of it like organic broccoli, kind of like organic farming. The inputs that we use are all certified organic, which then in turn produces an organic product for us. So not a huge demand, but definitely something that's a growing interest in a growing market. And it allows us to support organic agriculture, which is huge. Cut down on the use of petrochemicals, et cetera, in our process. Just kind of a little bit more environmentally friendly and greener, an option for folks.
Definitely seeing a push for that, everywhere, right? Everyone wants to be a little more health conscious of the environment, reduce the footprint, et cetera. That sort of, that moving towards that, which I think is great. It's good.
Yeah. I remember, Garrett, I forget who it was, if we spoke to, it can be difficult to label your beer as organic because you really have to source your yeast, your hops, your malt. Everything has to be organic, which can be a little bit tricky just logistically. Mm-hmm. But I think if you can do it, it's probably a good business choice and a good choice all around. Maybe getting back to your two locations, just we talked a little bit about logistics and how you're able to ship to New Zealand, Australia, Japan. Why Philadelphia? Was there a reason for that particular location? Like, obviously having a location on the East Coast is good, I can imagine, but was there a method to the madness for Philadelphia in particular?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, speaking back up to that logistics piece, it became quickly apparent that, because logistics is such a challenge and it's expensive, we were really losing some opportunities with breweries out on the East Coast because they loved our product. They loved working with us. They loved what it did for their beer. And the only real negative feedback we ever heard was the shipping is expensive. And so we started thinking pretty early on about looking to see if a second production facility on the East Coast made sense. And so started tracking where on the East Coast most of our packages were bound to. And about 30% of them were bound to like the Northeast portion of the United States. And so we really started honing in on that area as a potential second lab. And we did several, recon missions, I guess, for lack of a better word, to the East Coast to look for places, cities, not only that would be a great fit to start a business, purchase and or lease warehouse space, and made sense logistically, on major highways, major airports near it, kind of, interconnected to that commerce system, but also that were enjoyable to live in, that seemed vibrant and thriving, that had affordable housing, that we could really support an employee base out of. And so it kind of came down to two cities in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. And Philadelphia won out just because it's a little bit more ideally located in terms of those transit corridors, et cetera. And like I said, it's way easier to buy a house out on the East Coast, especially in that area, than it is to purchase anything out here on the West Coast. And so that piece of livability and employee well-being and like overall health and satisfaction was super important to us. So there we are in Philly. It's a really rad lab. If you ever visit, don't hesitate to reach out. You can get a tour.
Okay.
Oh, we definitely would have to.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And I'd rather cheer for the Eagles than the Steelers anyway. So better choice.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
All right. There
I'm
you
a
go.
Packer fan, so
Oh, yes, I am as well.
You made
All right.
Garrett's day. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of a Pittsburgh Steelers fan myself.
Oh boy, this
Uh-oh.
could go sideways.
This was going so well. Anyways, yeah. Well, maybe in terms of I'm really curious to know the size of Imperial as opposed to other entities in the business. Like, for example, who are the massive players? Like, who does AB InBev go to get their yeast? Do they do everything internally, or like what are the size differences in terms of macro beer and craft beer in yeast production?
Yeah, that's totally a good question. Our customer base is primarily the smaller craft beer producers, 5 barrels to 100-barrel brew houses. Anybody from the brewery that just opened up down the street from you that's making just tiny amount of beer, a couple thousand barrels a year, to breweries Sierra Nevada size. But we do work with some AB InBev entities, Miller Coors as well. And honestly, those really big, macro brands, they have a yeast lab that's, way fancier than anything that we have here on site, and they have their own capabilities to propagate from slant to pitch, no problem. And so, for the most part, the yeast labs that are servicing the beer industry are working with those smaller breweries. I think I mentioned White Labs and Y Yeast are kind of the OG yeast labs, but I'd say that us, Omega, Escarpment, those are the 3 that kind of come to mind that would be right in line behind the two original yeast labs. But like I said, bread and butter brewery that we work with is a 10 to 30 barrel brew house, that's producing 20 to 60,000 barrels a year, somewhere in there, because they are unlikely to have a sophisticated enough process to do everything in-house, and still need to rely on an outside yeast vendor to purchase propagations from, or even direct pitches, and really make a partnership with. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if it
Absolutely.
If it
Yeah.
okay.
So I think it kind of reflects the actual industry. It's sort of, there's nothing really in between. Macro is just this massive behemoth, and then craft breweries are there, and you service the craft market, and the macro players pretty much do everything in-house. That's fair to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do a lot in-house.
Yeah, if you ever get the chance to tour, Coors plant or any of the big AB plants, it's pretty incredible to see. They're growing their own grain and their own malt or their own hops, and they have their own glass manufacturing plant on site, and you're just like, holy cow, this is it's a city that's making beer. It's incredible.
Quite the spectacle.
Really, yeah, it is. Yeah.
We've talked to some other folks who work in yeast, and I believe we discussed trends. So obviously trends in craft beer are huge. It seems like every year, maybe less than that, sometimes more than that, there's a new trend, and that affects consumer interests. It affects the market in general. How close does that affect you folks in the yeast that you produce? I know you have your core 10, I think you said. Does it affect you at all? Not necessarily. Do trends matter?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it depends on what the trend is.
Yeah.
But if it's a particularly yeast driven trend, that will affect what we do. And what strains are popular and selling well versus what strains are maybe kind of taking a dip in sales. So it's very trend dependent.
I was just going to second what you said initially. It really depends on what the trend is. Um, some things people like to experiment more with. Yeah, and a lot of times just trying it, figuring it out, and seeing, hey, that actually makes a difference, or that seemed hot for a moment, but actually it really didn't amount to much. So it really has to depend on what we're talking about.
Mhm.
But I mean, most of the strains that we work with, though, I mean, it's again tried and true, and yeah, there's going to be seasonal ups and downs and trendy ups and downs, but um, you know, these have been around for quite a long time, over 100 years that these strains have been popular.
To kind of add to that, something that our sales team does is, engage in conversations with breweries and the people that are making beer. Talk about what's selling well, what's not selling well, what they're hearing feedback wise from their customers. Is the general public asking for a specific style of beer or a specific type or flavor profile? And when we hear that feedback, we're able to, then say, hey, let's talk about a yeast strain that could potentially help you achieve these goals. Whether that's, more tropical fruit, or, pineapple and guava flavors, or if it's, a super crispy, clean lager beer that they're trying to make. So really just engaging with our customer base and understanding what their needs are and what their wants are, is a huge key part of what we do. And then using that feedback to not only kind of guide them to a strain that we might have currently, but also, share that with Matt and the R&D team and say, hey, we're hearing this feedback from brewers and they're really wanting these types of flavor profiles. What can you guys do to help us either steer them towards certain varieties of strains, or potentially work on something that's new and exclusive that we can offer.
I know Matt mentioned earlier briefly about non-alcoholic beers, and we've sort of seen that as a large trend, at least in Southern Ontario. So has there been, I imagine there's been some, expansion and innovation in the yeast front for that. So maybe you guys can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, there has been quite a few presentations put together at conferences lately, and I know that there's been a few NA beers that have come out relatively recently that I think are pretty good. We do a lot of internal investigation here. We have a massive strain bank, and a lot of them are Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but we have other yeast strains and bacteria strains as well. And one of the things that we actually put on here, and it's called like a journal club. So it's something that we do kind of for like internal, kind of just like talking, education. And it's something that we maybe might put out to the public one day. But the next journal club, we have, I'd say, probably 10 to 15 employees that have been doing their own little research projects on these NA strains. And so we should have put together like I said, 10, 15 strains that people are going to talk about. And we've definitely had some breweries that have come at us lately and have been looking for advice on maybe how to use like a Pichia strain, or maybe to use like a Torospora strain. And we try to guide them to what they're looking for on that. And, sometimes it's not just breweries that are looking for NA beers with some of these alternative microorganisms. I think actually today we had a distillery that was asking about using Torospora for higher glycerol production, which will give you a better mouthfeel, like a full-bodied. So there's a whole range of alternative microorganisms out there as well. But did I answer your questions about the NA beer?
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. Well, it's nice to see that you guys are also seeing, the increase in activity with it. But I also wanted to say that I think that's awesome. You guys just have employees doing their own research projects internally to sort of expand innovation and get ideas flowing. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I really am very pleased with everyone in the brewing industry how excited people can get about this stuff. I think it's generally very, very interesting, and it always excites me when people get excited about yeast.
For sure.
I mean, it sounds funny, but I love yeast.
Yeah, you have to.
As you should.
I think it's like a requirement for
Mhm.
working at a yeast lab, especially as the R&D scientist. to
Yeah.
take a
Well,
yeast lab.
happy to be here.
Mhm. Do you find that there are different interests across, maybe just focusing on the United States? Do you find that you're shipping particular strains to different areas, like different, maybe East Coast, West Coast have a different preference in terms of what they're purchasing, what the breweries are purchasing, in terms of what the consumer is interested in drinking?
I wouldn't say it's East Coast versus West Coast, but it's definitely like big city versus smaller cities. I'd say like trends tend to either start on the East Coast or on the West Coast in those bigger cities, and they're really popular. And then like you'll be traveling 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half later, and somebody's making their first cold IPA, and you're like, oh, you're finally catching on to this trend here. Cool, guys. So I think it just sort of takes a little bit to sort of these trends circulate through the major metropolitan areas to the smaller, more rural based breweries, and that makes sense. You've got a far larger population in a city like Portland or Philadelphia, and a whole lot more consumers willing to try the new and outrageous versus a small town in Iowa, where they're like, why did you take away my red ale? That's what I like to drink, and that's what I want to drink. So I think it's really just based on where you are, and how close you are to a major city center.
Yeah, and I can say that I think there's difference in yeast strains that people will get. Also, obviously, depending on what industry, like the wine strains are obviously more popular with wine strains, but there's a little bit of crossover and, what can ferment what. But yeah, really depending on what your medium you're making. So whether it's like a cider, or, fruit-based or rice-based or grain-based barley.
Mm-hmm. No, fascinating. We're coming pretty close to our hour mark, but I have so many more questions. That's a shame. But maybe on that note, I'm going to end with a fun question that has no right or wrong answer. Maybe for both of you, just because Garrett and I are up here in Canada. Maybe from your perspective, where do you see the craft beer capital of the United States is? If you had to pick, preferably a city, I guess you could say a state, but if you can narrow it down to a city, where is the heart of craft beer in the US? I know it's a really hard question, maybe an impossible question, but I'm asking it regardless.
I'm going to take the easy bait here and say Portland, Oregon.
I mean, we're biased.
Yeah, I know. I forgot about that too. Yeah. Maybe put your bias aside if you can't, but Portland might be the right answer. Is a really solid answer.
I mean, I feel like we have probably the most breweries, or at least high up on the list of any city in the States. There's been, we're in one of the best hop growing regions in the world. And so I would argue that the Pacific Northwest, Portland especially, kind of invented what a West Coast IPA should be and taste like and look like. I know San Diego might have something to say about this, but
Probably.
probably they'd tell me I'm wrong. But I think that we sort of invented what people think of when they think of craft beer. They think of an IPA. I think at least nowadays, and so aside from that, this city's just wonderful in terms of the amount of collaboration and camaraderie and community that the beer industry has built. It's not just breweries. There's malts houses here. There's, like I said, hop farms here. We're a yeast lab. we just have this really amazing cohesive industry that obviously the breweries are competitors, but they're collaborating constantly. They're lending ingredients to each other. They're answering each other's questions and lending their experience um, and expertise. And it's just one of the most like open and enjoyable craft beer industries or craft beer communities I've had the pleasure of being a part of. I've traveled all over the United States, and while it's the same in many other areas, it's not quite as rad as we are. So yeah, Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, Portland,
Get a
and
strong
I'd
case
probably
for us to come visit.
yeah come visit.
Yeah, you
I'd-
should. Yeah, come visit. We'd love to show you around, drink some beers.
So Garrett and Andy, I'm going to have to ask you guys the same question. What is the capital of craft beer in the United States, in your opinion?
There we go, Andy. You're asking for it now. It's
In
coming
the
right back
US.
to you.
In the U.S., I'm going to ask you about Canada. The next question.
That's the follow-up.
Well, it's got to be Portland, Oregon, of course.
We're all taking the easy one here. I'm just gonna go with Portland. You know what? I'd say I'd almost. We read a lot of things, and we obviously get insight from people we talk to, and whether that's guests or influencers or social media, etc. But unfortunately, we haven't really had the pleasure of traveling too much throughout the states. So I'd love to go and do some traveling and then come back with real life experience to give you a better answer. To maybe put it in short.
I expect to hear from you next April then.
All right.
Done. Book us in.
That's a good challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, stop in Portland. I would definitely suggest Asheville, North Carolina too. That's a pretty good one.
Nashville,
San Diego,
In San Diego.
California.
San Diego,
Yeah.
sure.
That's second on my list.
Mhm. No, it was a bad question just because there's so much, right? We obviously
It was a fine question.
it's a fun question maybe, but yeah.
So what about
obviously-
Canada? What's the beer capital of Canada?
I'd like to
Very
know
good
Garrett's
question.
answer.
I think maybe it depends on style. Like if you're gonna well round it, and we're obviously biased, like I'd say Toronto. There's so many different breweries in Toronto with so many different flagship beers. Maybe to narrow it down, there's you'll get some that will be like a normal IPA, or you have like almost like a nut brown ale, which is a flagship. And I like to try and almost look at the flagship to sort of determine what makes what gets the gears turning for that brewery. And there's so many different variations among Toronto, which I think makes it really, really nice. Maybe by styles, like is probably another way to look at it. If we really want to get deep into the woods, like the IPAs are great. I haven't had too many from Vancouver, but like wonderful IPAs out in Vancouver. Montreal and parts of Quebec are really well known for Belgian styles. Yeah, I don't know. I'm more experience in Toronto, so I'm gonna as a short answer, I'll have to say Toronto. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth exploring much more for sure.
Andy?
I hate to say this because I bleed blue for Toronto, but Vancouver does have the most breweries in Canada. It really does coin itself as, it kind of associates itself with the Pacific Northwest a little bit, associating it with just the West Coast in its entirety. So maybe Vancouver. Pains me to say that though. So I'm going to stick with you, Garrett, and I'll say Toronto.
Yeah, I'm like a West Coast homer, so I'm gonna have to agree. Vancouver is definitely the beer capital of Canada.
I agree, but I won't say it.
Well, let me ask you this then. What is the favorite beer style? Because that's the second way Garrett organized it, was the beer style. Personally, I like really good Belgian beers, and then a hazy.
Yeah, I think that's too tricky. It depends on depends on the mood, depends on the season, of course. It's starting to get a bit warmer here, so.
Well, there's no wrong answers.
Starting to put the stouts away and reaching for some sours and some nice crisp lagers. So I don't know. That's a really hard question.
Like our favorite style, you're saying?
Yeah, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Oh, Andy, I figured you'd jump at IPA easily.
Yeah, I know. Probably maybe hazies too. I'm a sucker for the hazies.
Yeah, this is typically where I say it depends on my mood, but for the most part, I think Saison has definitely been in my top for a long time and will continue to be. And maybe just because of the scarcity. It's very hard to find, brewers that will, well, one, brew a Saison year round, and two, find a really, really, really good one. So yeah, that's probably at the top. And then IPA shoots right up under there, and anything seasonal after that for the most part. How
Well,
about you guys?
oh, okay.
I know we're crushing the hour here, but we'll finish off because I got to ask it right back.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, yeah, I think that I like really good Belgian beers, especially like a Belgian Saison, and then hazy IPA. I mean, there's so many varieties on that style. You can have so many of them. So that's my 1-2 punch there.
Oh man. Yeah. I always feel really awkward when I answer this question because I feel like I'm like trying to choose my favorite child or something.
Well, if you ask me tomorrow, my answer will change too. So
Right? Like I think to kind of take the easy route, it's definitely like what my mood is, time of day, the weather or the season. But the beer that got me into craft beer was IPA. And I think that's always where I will lean. But I can't deny a really, really amazing crisp Helles or a German Pilsner. It's delicious. Saison du Pont sounds really, really good right now too. So one of my favorite questions to ask in an interview for somebody interviewing for a job is build me a 6-pack that's like magical and always refills, and you're stuck on a desert island, and hear what people have to say in terms of what they put in it. So yeah, that's a fun question. But
That's a great question.
IPA, I'll be basic.
Mhm.
It's
No,
who I am, right?
it's a solid answer. Well, Casey Helwig, Matt Winans, thank you so much for your time. Imperial Yeast in Portland, Oregon, and now Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much to you both. We look forward to chatting again next time.
thank you,
Thanks for
Andy.
having us.
Thank you, Garrett.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.